One moonlit night in medieval Ireland, a lone priest traveling through the woods of Ossory was confronted by a chilling sight. From the darkness emerged a great wolf, but instead of attacking, the beast spoke with a human voice. The wolf pleaded for the priest's help, begging him to give last rites to its dying mate. This was no ordinary fairy tale or fireside legend. According to a 12th century chronicler, this encounter really happened in the wilds of Ossory. The tale of the werewolves of Ossory, humans cursed to live as wolves for years at a time, has become a key part of Irish lore and continues to fascinate historians and folklorists alike. What were these werewolves, and why did medieval writers take their story so seriously? In the Topographia Hibernica, written around 1188, the Norman Welsh cleric Gerald of Wales recorded one of the most famous accounts of the Ossory werewolves. Gerald tells of an unnamed priest who was journeying through Ossory, a medieval Irish kingdom roughly in today's County Kilkenny, when he encountered an astonishing creature. A large wolf approached the priest's campfire. To the priest's utter amazement, the wolf began to speak, imploring him not to be afraid. The frightened priest demanded to know what sort of wolf this was, and the creature proceeded to explain its tragic story, as was the style for Irish werewolves at the time. According to Gerald's account, the wolf revealed that he and his wife were in fact natives of Ossory who labored under a powerful curse. Long ago, Saint Natalis, a local abbot, had punished their people for an unspecified sin. As a result, a man and a woman from Ossory were condemned to transform into wolves every 7 years, banished to the woods in wolfish form. If they survived the full 7-year term, they would regain their human shape and return home. But there was a catch. Another man and woman would then take their place under the curse for the next 7 years. The talking wolf before the priest was one such accursed man, and his ailing wolf companion was actually his wife. Now she lay dying, and despite wearing the body of a wolf, she still had the soul of a human. The wolf implored the priest to give his wife the last rites of the church so that her soul would not be lost. Faced with this implausible request, the priest was understandably hesitant. To reassure him, the male wolf drew back the fur from his female companion's body, revealing the form of an elderly human woman beneath the wolfskin. Seeing this disturbing display, the priest's doubts vanished, and he accepted that the creature laying before him was in some sort of flux between wolf and human form. He performed the communion for the dying and prayed over the she-wolf, granting her the comfort of the sacraments. The male wolf remained by their side, speaking and responding with pious devotion throughout the ritual. After the she-wolf received her rites, the male wolf escorted the priest safely out of the woods. Before they parted, the wolf delivered a prophecy about the political future of Ireland and its recent Norman invaders, speaking with an almost otherworldly insight. News of this encounter soon spread, and Gerald writes that the priest later reported the incident to the local bishop, and a church synod was convened to investigate the matter. On Gerald's advice, the priest was even sent on a journey to present his story to the Pope in Rome. In other words, the medieval church took the Ossory werewolves seriously enough to seek judgment from the Holy See. Gerald of Wales's narrative is dramatic and eerie, but it is not an isolated folk tale. It sits at the crossroads of medieval religion, folklore, and colonial politics. A number of unique features make the Ossory werewolves stand out from typical werewolf lore. For one, these werewolves talk and are far from being mindless beasts. They speak rationally about God, ask for sacraments, and deliver prophetic statements. In fact, they're very well-mannered and keep their word as well, behaving better than many non-werewolf humans would. Despite being in wolf form, they aren't the usual wild beings of werewolf folklore. They're victims of a hereditary curse and remain fundamentally human in spirit despite their lupine bodies. The story portrays them sympathetically, as cursed souls seeking redemption rather than monstrous villains. The question on most people's minds after hearing about these werewolves is straightforward. What gave rise to such an unusual legend? Modern researchers have shown that the werewolves of Ossory were not a product of Gerald's imagination alone, but part of a much older Irish tradition. The idea of humans turning into wolves appears in multiple medieval Irish sources, and intriguingly, it often points back to Ossory. As early as the 11th century, an Irish cleric named Patrick, Bishop of Dublin, wrote a Latin poem that mentions a clan of shapeshifters. According to this poem, these people acquired this power from birth, rather than a demonic pact. While transformed, these people would stalk the forests, slaughtering sheep like real wolves, yet their human bodies remained elsewhere in a trance. The poem describes how any wounds inflicted on the wolf form would mysteriously appear on the person's human body, as if the two forms were still connected. Family and friends were warned never to disturb the inert human body during the magical transformation, or else the roaming soul might not find its way back. Notably, the poem explicitly ties this wonder to ancestry. It was an inherited nature, which parallels the Ossory tale of a curse passed down through generations. The kingdom of Ossory itself had long-standing wolf associations. In medieval Irish genealogy, the kings of Ossory claimed descent from a legendary figure named Leanech Faelad, whose nickname literally means wolf-like or wolf-man. According to this, the Ossory kings and their descendants supposedly carried the power, or curse, of transforming into wolves. Such an origin myth might have been a point of fierce pride or dread, implying that the Osorians had a wild, otherworldly ancestry distinct from other Irish clans. Scholars believe these legends were heavily influenced by the culture of ancient Irish warriors. In medieval Irish literature, warriors and outlaws were often compared to wolves for their ferocity and wilderness lifestyle. Bands of young warriors lived in forests, surviving as hunters, and were sometimes described as taking on wolf-like characteristics. Further, there are accounts of Irish fighters wearing wolf skins or adopting wolf-inspired hairstyles as they went into battle or raids. Importantly, by the Middle Ages, bears were likely extinct in Ireland, and wolves, along with boars, fit neatly into the role of apex predators on the island. It makes sense that groups of young warriors and bandits would come to see themselves as a wolf pack living at the edge of society. These historical realities could easily seed tales of literal shape-shifting. A ruthless warrior donned in a wolf pelt might be imagined to actually become a wolf in the heat of combat. Over time, such stories could grow into the full-blown legend of a tribe of werewolves inhabiting Ossory. This in turn could lead to a genealogy where the kings of Ossory are descended from a clan of werewolves. In turn, over time, this legend could have further morphed into the tale told by Gerald of Wales. In other words, the Ossory werewolves legend may preserve echoes of a very real practice. From these ancient Irish wolf warriors, whose appearance and behavior blurred the line between man and beast, we may have gotten a bizarre tale of a Christian werewolf needing final rites. As the consensus now stands, the werewolves of Ossory are more than the bizarre medieval tale they're generally portrayed as. The mystery, somewhat surprisingly, appears to be fully grounded in real medieval Irish history, with layers of religious overtones added on top of it. That said, the actual event involving the priest meeting the two werewolves remains poorly understood. However, the leading theory is that it may have been a metaphorical tale, which had its meaning rendered quite literal over time. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here. Just reminding you to click like and subscribe and to share this video around. Also, remember to check out the YouTube membership or the Patreon if you want to support my channel and my work further. It was a serene Sunday in medieval Ireland. The congregation at the monastery of Clonmacnoise had gathered for Mass, unaware that they were about to witness something extraordinary. As the service ended and people filtered out of the church, they looked up and gasped. High above them, a wooden ship was seemingly sailing through the air. The villagers stood in astonishment as the airborne vessel drifted overhead. Then, with a sudden jolt, an anchor attached to a rope plummeted from the skyship and caught fast on the wooden arch of the church door. The people rushed forward to examine this uncanny object from the heavens. Moments later, one of the ship's crew climbed down the rope, moving as though swimming through water. He struggled to free the anchor from the church door, while the onlookers watched in disbelief. Some bystanders grabbed hold of the visitor, perhaps hoping to capture a being from the sky. The Bishop of Clonmacnoise, however, intervened. He realized the sailor was drowning in air, choking as if submerged in water. The bishop shouted for the crowd to release the man. As soon as they let go, the sky sailor caught his breath, swam back up the rope to his ship, and the vessel sailed away into the clouds. The anchor, now loosed, was left behind as evidence of this fleeting encounter between earth and sky. This is no modern tale. It's a legendary anecdote recorded in medieval chronicles, known today as the airship of Clonmacnoise. For over 1,000 years, this story has captivated imaginations, from monks and medieval scholars to modern historians and UFO enthusiasts. What exactly did the people of 8th century Ireland see that day, and how has this mystery in the sky been interpreted over time? To answer those questions, we must journey back to the early Middle Ages, when Irish scribes first noted the astonishing sight of ships sailing overhead. Clonmacnoise was a thriving monastic city in early medieval Ireland. Founded in the mid-6th century, it grew into a renowned center of faith and learning on the banks of the River Shannon. Dozens of stone churches, round towers, and carved crosses dotted its grounds, attracting monks and pilgrims from across Ireland. It's against this real and well-documented historical backdrop that our skyship story unfolds. The earliest record of something strange in the skies over Ireland comes from the Irish annals in the 8th century. Multiple annalists, medieval scribes who kept yearly chronicles of events, noted a remarkable occurrence around the year 743 AD. The Annals of Ulster, for example, report concisely that ships with their crews were seen in the air over Ireland. Similar brief entries appear in the Annals of Tigernach, the Annals of Clonmacnoise, and others, all referring to what seems to be the same event. Clearly, something about this sighting made medieval observers feel it was noteworthy enough to record alongside kings' battles and natural disasters. We can imagine the mixture of fear and wonder such a sight might have inspired. To these chroniclers, the sky itself appeared to be hosting ghostly ships. Naturally, the annals give no details beyond the bare fact of the apparition, since annals, by their nature, are brief and matter-of-fact reports, not narrative accounts. Think of them as X happened in year Y, with no further analysis. As the story of aerial ships was retold over the centuries, it did not remain a one-line entry in dusty annals. Medieval storytellers and monks expanded and embellished the account, adding colorful details that transformed the mystery into a rich legend. One early elaboration appears in the Book of Leinster, a 12th century manuscript, which situates the event during a great fair at Telltown in County Meath. According to this version, while the men of Ireland gathered for a festival in the 8th century, they looked up and saw 3 ships voyaging through the air above them. This time, The story offers more than just a sighting. It describes an interaction. One of the sky ship's crewmen cast a fishing spear down from the ship at a salmon swimming far below in Ireland's waters. He struck the fish, and the salmon dropped out of the sky onto the ground amid the astonished festival goers. Determined to retrieve his catch, a sailor from the airborne ship swam down through the air to reach the ground. The crowd swarmed around as this otherworldly fisherman retrieved the fallen salmon. One man on the ground grabbed at the man out of curiosity, only to have the strange visitor cry out that he was drowning. In that moment, the people realized that what was mere air to them was experienced as water by the sky sailor. In the Book of Leinster's Tale, a local king wisely ordered the onlookers to release the visitor and let him swim back up to his ship, which they did. The skyman returned to his floating vessel, disappearing into the heavens with his salmon, and the assembly below was left marveling at what they had witnessed. Over time, the legend continued to evolve in monastic lore, and while the story stayed broadly the same, it was made more engaging and compelling. The number of ships was whittled down from 3 to 1 singular ship, and the setting shifted to the hallowed ground of Clonmacnoise Abbey itself. An influential version of the story appears in a Middle Irish text, perhaps composed by the 12th century, preserved in a later manuscript now in Edinburgh. In this telling, the fantastic encounter takes place at the church of Clonmacnoise on a Sunday. As people attended Mass, a lone ship sailed overhead and dropped an anchor down from the sky. The anchor's fluke snagged onto the doorway of the church, preventing the ship from moving on. The congregation, pouring outside, grabbed hold of the anchor chain, perhaps trying to prevent the mysterious ship from escaping. Soon, a sailor from the sky ship dove overboard and swam down through the air toward the ground. There he reached the church door, straining to unhook the anchor caught on it. Down below, the clergy and onlookers seized the opportunity. They grabbed the anchor and possibly the descending sailor himself, but the Bishop of Clonmacnoise urgently warned them to let the man go, fearing that they'd drown him in the water-like air. The people heeded the bishop's command and released the visitor. The sky sailor, now free, managed to dislodge his anchor and clambered back up the rope to rejoin his ship. The crew cut the rope, leaving the anchor behind, and the ship then sailed away out of sight. In this account, the anchor left behind at Clonmacnoise became a prized relic on display, a tangible proof that this otherworldly incident had occurred. Through such retellings, the airship legend gained vivid detail and a sense of place. What began as a vague note of ships in the air grew into a full narrative with dialogue, named locations, and even moral insight. In both these fleshed-out versions, an authority figure wisely notices that the man will perish if kept on the ground and orders him let go. Notably, the story also encapsulated a striking idea that the laws of nature could invert between the world of the sky people and our own. To those on the ground, air is light and breathable, while water is heavy and suffocating. But for the visitors from the sky ocean, it seemed, the reverse was true. This theme of inversion gave the tale a thought-provoking twist that likely helped it spread far beyond its Irish origins. Medieval Europe had a voracious appetite for marvels and miracle stories, and the airship didn't remain an exclusively Irish wonder. As the tale of the skyship circulated, writers in other countries adapted it to their own locales. One of the earliest non-Irish references comes from a French chronicle. The chronicler wrote that in the year 1122, a ship's anchor dropped from the sky and snagged in a churchyard in London, England. In this version of events, the locals supposedly found a rope attached to the anchor, leading up into the clouds. They initially tried to Jack and the Beanstalk their way up to the top to the sky world, but gave up after minimal efforts. They then waited around, and after some time a sailor descended the rope. This person was unable to free the anchor before the curious crowd gathered around him and helped him out, eventually allowing him to rejoin his crew in the sky. Unlike the subsequent story, though, this is an all's well that ends well story of a community coming together to help out a visitor from the sky. In one dramatic account by the English historian Gervase of Tilbury, the unfortunate sky sailor who came down was actually grabbed by the onlookers. In this version, the otherworldly figure ended up perishing in the dense air, and the ship above, after waiting in vain for its crewman's return, finally cut the rope and sailed away. In this version, once again, they left the anchor behind as a souvenir of the event. Gervase, writing around 1211 in his Otia Imperialia, even noted that the church door of that village was later fitted with ironwork made from the mysterious anchor's metal. I should mention that Gervase of Tilbury was in the service of Holy Roman Emperor Otto IV, who was the grandson of Henry II of England. This book was specifically written for the entertainment of the emperor and included everything from contemporary folklore to ancient legends to cutting-edge 13th century science. Given that Gervase of Tilbury included this story in his compilation, with added flourishes, it's believed that the legend was widely known in English clerical circles at the time. By the mid-13th century, the legend had made its way back into Irish circles in a polished form. A Norwegian text known as the King's Mirror, written around 1250, includes a section on strange marvels of Ireland, wherein it retells the Clon MacNoise incident. This was intended to be a text that would be read and understood by Norwegian rulers and included events considered particularly important to governance. In this version, the bishop is given the starring role when he bravely commands the unruly mob to release the sky sailor. It's believed that the action of the bishop was supposed to be a moral instruction to future Norwegian kings. From Ireland to Britain to Scandinavia, the story of a ship cruising the heavens and dropping its anchor had become part of the medieval repertoire of the marvelous. The airship legend didn't fade after the Middle Ages either. It continued to surface in various forms in later centuries. In the 19th century, for instance, scholars and folklorists rediscovered the tale in old manuscripts and published it for contemporary readers. It even made a curious reappearance in 1897 during the great wave of mystery airship sightings in the United States. In April of that year, a newspaper in Texas reported that local churchgoers saw a brilliant airship with lights in the sky, dragging a rope and anchor along the ground. The story goes that the anchor snagged on a railroad track, and a humanoid figure slid down the rope, cut it free, and flew off into the darkness with the airborne craft. The abandoned anchor was, allegedly, later displayed in the town's blacksmith shop. This Texas tale was almost certainly a journalistic hoax to sell papers. However, its details are so similar to the medieval legend that there's little doubt someone was consciously borrowing from the old Irish historical mystery. This legend is so intriguing that it's managed to attract both significant popular attention as well as scholarly attention as well. Modern scholars have approached this mystery from multiple angles, seeking either a rational explanation for the original report or a deeper understanding of its mythic meaning. But first, we really need to consider the medieval European mindset, since that makes the viral nature of this tale much more sensible. In the early medieval worldview, the sky was not an empty void, but a realm that could contain its own oceans and lands. The Bible itself mentions waters above the firmament in Genesis, and this led to centuries of debate about what lay above the clouds in the heavens. Some medieval scholars thought the upper waters were a literal ocean in the heavens. Gervase of Tilbury, for example, firmly believed that a real sea existed above the sky. In such a context, the notion of ships sailing on an upper sea was not utterly implausible to a medieval audience. The airship legend may have been received not as a report of alien invaders, but as a wondrous affirmation that the natural order contained marvels beyond ordinary comprehension. Notably, Celtic folklore often featured inversions of reality and journeys between worlds. In fact, Irish legend has other examples of the sea and land swapping places. One saint's story describes two holy men meeting on the ocean, one walking on water because to him it appears as a flowery meadow, while the other sails a boat because he sees it as water. Each perceives the world differently until they share their perspectives, and only when they meet are the two perspectives that overlay the exact same world mutually intelligible. The airship of Clonmacnoise carries a similar theme. In this context, these airship stories suggest that not only is an inversion of the natural order possible, but that each reality is valid in its own frame of reference. Other attempts to explain what the airship sighting was focus on the bare bones of the original chronicle reference. One candidate is an atmospheric optical illusion, more specifically, a kind of mirage. There is a known phenomenon called a fata morgana, where light bending through layers of air can project a distant scene above the horizon. This sometimes makes ships appear as if they're floating in the sky. This usually occurs over large bodies of water or ice on the horizon. If observers in early medieval Ireland saw a distant ship refracted into the sky, they might indeed describe it as ships in the air. Meanwhile, outside academic circles, the airship of Clonmacnoise has drawn attention from the UFO and paranormal community. Many ufologists point to it as evidence of an early alien visitation, or UFO sighting, interpreting the ship and its crew literally as extraterrestrials described in medieval terms. Indeed, lists of historical UFO encounters often include the 743 AD airborne ships over Ireland as a precursor to later sightings. Interestingly, some Irish folklorists have offered another interpretation, not aliens, but fairies. In Irish mythology, the boundary between the fairy realm and our own was thin, and stories abound of fantastical aerial occurrences involving fairy folk. In one legend from another part of Ireland, a host of fairies was seen battling in the skies above. Ultimately, with the scant evidence available, no one can say for certain what inspired the airship story. Modern science leans toward atmospheric optics as the root, while cultural scholars emphasize the narrative's role as a teaching tale or symbolic myth. There is also the possibility that the original chronicler's report was simply metaphorical language, perhaps describing an omen or vision rather than a concrete event. Without a time machine to visit 8th century Ireland, we have to rely on inference. What we can be sure of is that the story struck a chord and endured because it was rich with meaning. Perhaps the mystery of the event also led to the story being repeated more over the generations, since everyone who hears the tale has their own take on what it could have been. The Lost Dutchman's gold mine is said to be a massive cache of gold hidden in Arizona's Superstition Mountains. This is a treasure trove so rich, it's rumored to be valued at over $200 million. According to legend, this secret mine was rediscovered in the 19th century by Jacob Waltz, a German immigrant known as the Dutchman. The lore indicates this German-American prospector took its location to his grave in 1891. Over the past century, the story of the Lost Dutchman has captivated countless treasure hunters and become perhaps the most famous lost mine legend in American history. Each year, hopeful prospectors venture into these rugged peaks searching for Waltz's elusive gold, guided by cryptic clues that may be more legend than reality. None have ever found a trace of the treasure, at least not publicly, and some have paid with their lives while pursuing it. Numerous disturbing and well-documented deaths have been associated with the hunt for the treasure well into the 20th century. One origin story for the Lost Dutchman legend begins with the Peralta family, wealthy Mexican landowners who controlled the mountains in the region. In the 1840s, the Peraltas reportedly developed a rich gold mine in the Superstition Mountains and extracted a fortune in ore. What happened next varies depending on the telling, but every version revolves around this Mexican family. In one version, in 1848, the mining operation was supposedly ambushed by Apache warriors, leaving virtually everyone who knew the location of it deceased. In another version, the Apache warriors attacked the Peralta family directly, wiping them out specifically not due to the mine, but due to a territorial dispute. In this version of the story, the Peraltas were all slain, except for one member of the family who eventually told Jacob Waltz the family secret. It remains unclear if the Peralta family ever actually had a claim in the Superstition Range, or if this tale was grafted onto the legend years later. That said, historians do note that there was a documented wealthy Mexican cattle ranching family named De Peralta, who controlled territory in the region. Later treasure hunters found a set of carved rock maps known as the Peralta Stones. The Peralta Stones, which I've put up on the screen if you just listen, have been taken by some theorists to be proof positive of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine. These stones are supposedly a map that was used by Jacob Waltz to find the gold mine. The Peralta stones themselves are their own mystery, but some researchers believe them to be legitimate while others believe the stones are 20th century forgeries. But let's get to the legend's most pivotal figure, Jacob Waltz, the Lost Dutchman himself. Waltz was a German immigrant who arrived in Arizona in the mid-19th century to prospect for gold. By way of programming note, the nickname comes from the old term used by Americans for Germans at the time, and has nothing to do with the Dutch. According to the lore, Waltz discovered the hidden mine in the 1870s with the help of a Peralta descendant and worked it with a partner, Jacob Weiser. The two men periodically emerged from the mountains with saddlebags laden heavy with gold ore, but, as one may expect given the time, they never revealed where it came from. Weiser eventually vanished. Some said Apaches had ended him, others suspected Waltz had a hand in it. And Waltz grew secretive about the mine, and generally reclusive. In October 1891, an elderly and ailing Waltz lay on his deathbed in Phoenix, and gave his caretaker, Julia Thomas, enigmatic directions to the mine's location. Julia and others who followed Waltz's hints never managed to find the treasure, but they did recover a significant amount of gold hidden under Waltz's bed. Some have taken this as tangible proof that something was there, while others point out that Waltz was a well-known prospector regardless. For generations since the death of the Dutchman, treasure hunters have sought to grab a hold of his glistening booty. Many searchers focus around Weaver's Needle, a jagged 1,000-foot spire in the Superstitions, which appears in most versions of Waltz's tale as a key landmark near the hidden mine. Explanations for why the mine has never been found, if it ever existed at all, are quite mundane. Some historians argue there was never a rich mine at all. Under this theory, they suggest Waltz either stole his ore from other mines or found a one-time cache, meaning no mother lode remains to be discovered. If he stole it, he may have simply made up the story to explain why he had significant wealth that otherwise couldn't be accounted for. Others speculate that Waltz and Weiser may have been even more sinister figures, who may have slain other prospectors and again used an ill-defined mine as a cover story. Virtually nothing is known about why these men left Germany, or their history outside the mine, leading some to speculate that they had criminal histories. That said, This is pure speculation, with no evidence whatsoever to support it. Others theorize the entrance may now be sealed or even submerged. One theory suggests the Dutchman's gold could lie under Apache Lake, an artificial lake formed by the Horse Mesa Dam. If this is the case, this would make any attempts by amateur treasure hunters to find the gold mine entirely futile. Importantly, this dam was established in the 1920s, well before the story had acquired the legendary status it currently has. It's possible then that by the time treasure hunters arrived, the gold was already long buried. Every few years, a new purported clue or decoding of an old cipher makes headlines, but each supposed discovery inevitably ends in disappointment. To date, no one has definitively confirmed the location of Jacob Waltz's mine, and its whereabouts remain an enduring mystery. Perhaps just as interesting as the gold itself is the history of the search and the dangers faced by those who have sought the Dutchman's gold. Sheer cliffs, maze-like canyons, and iron-rich rocks skew compasses and make navigation perilous. Summer temperatures in the Arizona desert regularly soar above 110 degrees Fahrenheit, while sudden storms in cooler months can bring flash floods or hypothermia-inducing cold. Water is scarce in this rugged wilderness, and cell phones often have no signal. Notably, Dutchman treasure seekers often go in unprepared, carrying too little water, wearing the wrong gear, and underestimating the terrain, mistakes that can be fatal. Some have speculated that this is because many of the people who seek the treasure aren't experienced hikers, just amateurs who've caught the treasure hunting bug. Further, many of these individuals come from parts of the country that are much more hospitable in terms of climate. For instance, getting off course for a couple hours on a hike in the Great Smokies isn't good, but generally isn't fatal. The same can't be said for an unintended detour through the Arizona desert, where a poorly provisioned hiker can die of exposure rapidly. In addition to natural hazards, the search for the lost Dutchman has a bloody history of violence, suggesting that at some point someone may have been guarding something in the area. In 1931, an amateur explorer vanished while hunting for the mine. 6 months later, his skull was found in a remote canyon with 2 holes identified as bullet wounds, and his gruesome fate made national headlines. Some speculated at the time that this explorer may have gotten a bit too close to the truth. In 1945, an author named Barry Storm claimed he narrowly escaped a sniper's bullet in the Superstitions. He speculated that this phantom shooter might have also slain the previous explorer to guard the mine's secrets. Notably, at the time, this story was treated as a sensationalistic tale designed to drum up interest in a book. Subsequent events would prove that this likely wasn't the case, and that Storm was likely actually shot at. In 1947, prospector James Cravey chartered a helicopter into the mountains to search for the treasure, believing that he had cracked the case. Several months later, his headless remains were found out in the wilderness. Throughout the 50s and 60s, several other treasure hunters were found dead in the wild. They had all been shot. Others simply never returned home, with no signs of their bodies ever found. The hunt for the mine continues to claim lives into the 21st century, with the last known treasure hunters having perished from exposure in 2010 while on the trail of the gold. After more than a century of intrigue, the truth behind the lost Dutchman's gold mine mystery remains unsolved. No expedition has ever conclusively proven the mine's existence, yet the legend endures as one of the epic tales of the Old West. Imagine a small leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age, hidden away on a library shelf. Inside are hundreds of pages of indecipherable writing. Strange symbols dance across each page in neat lines, but no one can read a single word. This isn't the Voynich manuscript, but rather the much lesser known but equally mysterious Rohank Codex. The Rohank Codex first came to light in Hungary in the 19th century. In 1838, a Hungarian count named Gustav Bathany donated his entire library to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, and among his books was this puzzling codex. The manuscript had been kept in the town of Rohank, now Rechnitz in Austria, but little else is known of its past. It essentially appeared out of nowhere, with no author, no title, and no explanation, just a book of unknown symbols waiting to be understood. Today, the codex is stored in the Hungarian Academy's library in Budapest, where only a few scholars have ever been permitted to examine the fragile original. Physically, the codex is small in size but extraordinary in content. It contains 448 paper pages with roughly 9 to 14 lines of symbols per page. The text appears to run right to left and is neatly justified at the right margin. In between the dense lines of script are 87 illustrations depicting various scenes. The drawings mix Christian crosses, Islamic crescents, and potentially pagan sun symbols in their imagery. As for the script itself, it features nearly 800 distinct characters, far more than any known alphabet. Some symbols appear frequently, others only once or twice, leaving researchers to wonder if this is a complex cipher or an unknown language. Notably, there is one additional forensic clue about the origin of the mysterious book. The paper carries an Italian watermark from the 1530s, hinting that the codex, or at least its paper, originated in the 16th century. From the start, people questioned whether the Rohank Codex was authentic or a forgery. One theory holds that it's an elaborate hoax concocted in the late 18th or early 19th century. According to some historians, Samuel Nemes, a notorious Hungarian forger active in the 1830s, might have created the codex to fool collectors. Nemes had a reputation for producing a small quantity of fake documents and bundling them into real collections of legitimate antiquities. Bundling documents that he forged himself with legitimate bundles both raised the price of the bundled documents and gave the forgeries the air of legitimacy, since everything else was real. And honestly, that's a pretty ingenious way to make some additional cash if you're light on ethics and heavy on knowledge of antiquities. Since the codex surfaced around that same time, many Hungarian experts still lean toward the hoax explanation. However, no proof of Nemes's involvement has ever been found, and intriguingly, a catalog entry from 1743 may have listed this very volume among accounts prayer books. If that entry indeed referred to the Rohank Codex, then the manuscript existed decades before the proposed forger was even born. Further, even those who are skeptical about the authenticity of the Codex admit that it is a vast and apparently rule-bound system. This seems unlikely in the event that it was a simple forgery. On the other hand, plenty of researchers argue the Rohank Codex is a genuine text, just written in a code or language we don't recognize. Analysts have found repeating patterns and orderly sequences in the symbols, suggesting it encodes meaningful information. Studies in the late 20th century confirmed the script's direction and identified clusters that look like intentional words or numbers. The text lacks certain markers such as the grammatical endings you would expect in normal Hungarian. According to those who believe this is a real document, this indicates that it likely isn't of Hungarian origin. Notably, many so-called translations of the Rohank Codex have been released over the years, all of which have fallen apart under scrutiny. In 1996, Hungarian scholar Attila Nyri proposed a Sumerian-Hungarian connection. And yeah, if that wasn't enough of a giveaway, this quote-unquote translation would go off the rails very quickly. His method involved turning the pages upside down, identifying one symbol as a Sumerian glyph, and then assigning Latin letters to the other symbols based on loose visual resemblance. His approach was widely condemned as arbitrary because he would change the letter assigned to a symbol whenever it was convenient to make a Hungarian word appear. Basically, he was engaging in a classic case of forcing the data to fit the theory. Further, scholars pointed out that there was no apparent connection between ancient Sumerians and Hungarian people. Instead, Attila Nyeri had essentially engaged in a nationalistic interpretation of this ancient codex, a theme which we will see continue with the next translation attempt as well. A few years later, in 2002, a Romanian academic named Viorica Enicic published her own quote-unquote translation. She claimed the text was written in a vulgar Latin dialect from ancient Dacia and was to be read right to left and, bizarrely, from the bottom of the page to the top. On the bright side, at least she didn't need to flip the page upside down, or place it on a dog's snout, or do an interpretive dance before reading the text. Her translation produced a dramatic narrative of early 12th century Romanian people fighting against Hungarians and nomadic horse lords. However, her work was dismissed for the same reasons as the previous one. The translation was inconsistent, destroying the original text's patterns, and the resulting story had no discernible connection to the codex's own illustrations. It was essentially a Rohank Codex-derived historical fiction that seemed to carry significant nationalist overtones. In stark contrast to these speculative translations, modern research has taken a more systematic approach. At present, a team of Hungarian scholars is working on decoding the book. They've argued that the codex is not written in a natural language with a simple cipher, but is instead a more complex code system. They propose the text is a Catholic reader, containing paraphrases of New Testament stories about Jesus, written around 1593, in a deliberately constructed artificial language. This theory explains both the script's regularity and its stubborn resistance to decipherment. Building off this idea, one historian has suggested the script could be a transcription of a monastic language developed solely within one monastery. In communities that had taken a vow of silence, like the Trappist or Cistercian orders, monks developed complex sign languages to communicate while maintaining silence. Today, the Rohank Codex remains what it has always been, a book that refuses to be read. We know its paper is from 16th century Italy, and we're sure it reads from right to left. We know its script is complex and rule-based and not simply gibberish tossed on the page. We also know that every attempt at a simple translation has failed. The path forward likely lies with modern technology and human researchers working in concert to crack this unusual code and finally answer what the codex says. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to like and subscribe and to share this video. Also, don't forget to check out my other channels if you're into more generalized mystery content or true crime content. In the late summer of 1848, the British warship HMS Daedalus was en route from the Cape of Good Hope toward St. Helena in the South Atlantic. On August 6, 1848, roughly 300 miles off the coast of modern-day Namibia, sailors aboard the Daedalus spotted an astonishing sea serpent gliding through the waves. According to the captain and his officers, the creature held about 4 feet of its head and neck above the water, with an estimated 60 feet or more of its body trailing on the surface. Combining these observations, they approximated the creature's total length at up to 100 feet. The head was described as long, pointed, and flattened on top, with a dark brown coloration and a lighter yellowish-white throat area. Notably, the crew saw no ordinary whale fins or flippers, but instead, they reported a peculiar feature along the back, like a shaggy mane or a trail of seaweed atop the body. The animal moved steadily at about 12 to 15 miles per hour, maintaining a straight course even in a choppy sea. It occasionally dipped under waves, but showed no obvious sign of the spouting or surfacing behavior typical of whales. Hundreds of crew members watched the creature in astonishment for a considerable time, with some estimating it remained visible for up to 20 minutes. The captain emphasized how close the creature came, saying that it was near enough that he claimed he could have recognized a person's features at that distance. One lieutenant, Edgar Drummond, sketched the scene and described a long, snake-like form with a dorsal fin about 20 feet behind the head, and perhaps a tail fin further back. Whatever it was, the men of the Daedalus knew they had witnessed something highly unusual. When HMS Daedalus returned to England in the fall of 1848, the captain filed an official report to the Admiralty describing the encounter. Before long, news of the sea serpent leaked to the press, sparking a Victorian-era sensation. The London Times published the report on October 10, 1848, giving readers a vivid account of an enormous serpent seen by Royal Navy officers. The public's imagination was captivated. Here was testimony of a sea monster from a highly credible source. The fact that experienced naval officers, the Daedalus had around 300 men, were willing to stake their reputations on the sighting lent the story instant credibility. Many considered the witnesses, disciplined men familiar with the sea, with some trained in natural science, to be reliable observers, which gave pause even to skeptics. However, not everyone accepted the tale at face value. The scientific community and naval authorities reacted with skepticism and concern. The Times sought a prosaic explanation, and Sir Richard Owen, a renowned biologist, stepped forward to debunk the sighting. Owen asserted that the crew had seen not a serpent, but a large marine mammal, likely an elephant seal, whose appearance misled them. He argued that the reported long tail was nothing more than a trail of disturbed water following the creature as it swam. The captain vehemently rejected Owen's explanation. He fired back in the press, insisting that neither he nor his officers could mistake an elephant seal, or any known creature, for what they saw. To them, the suggestion was absurd, given how close and clear their view had been, and the public debate grew heated. Some sided with the captain, convinced that the ocean harbored at least one species of gigantic unknown animal, while others agreed with Owen's interpretation. Unsurprisingly, the Admiralty wasn't amused by the spectacle and all the attention generated by the incident. The affair even reached Parliament, where officials questioned the judgment of naval officers who promoted apparent monster sightings in the media. An inquiry was held into how the captain's report got published, and the Navy felt some embarrassment at the situation. In spite of this official disapproval, the captain stood by his story. He even cooperated with the Illustrated London News to publish engraved illustrations of the creature based on the crew's testimony. The dramatic images, printed in late October 1848, grabbed public attention even further and were reprinted across the world. These illustrations, essentially the Victorian equivalent of viral photographs, cemented the Daedalus sea serpent as one of the era's most famous maritime mysteries. The HMS Daedalus incident has continued to fascinate researchers, skeptics, and maritime historians to this day. With the benefit of hindsight, many have tried to pin down what exactly the crew saw. Over the years, several explanations have been put forward. A prevailing view is that the Daedalus crew encountered a known creature under unusual conditions. Owen's own theory that it was a large seal was one early example of this approach. However, the seal hypothesis itself is now largely dismissed as not fitting with the significant eyewitness evidence. In modern times, the leading explanation is a type of whale. In 2015, for instance, biologist Gary Galbraith argued that a rare whale, called a sei whale, best fits the description. A sei whale feeding near the surface can present a long, dark back with a pointed head and pale underside, much like the creature described. The reported dorsal fin position, roughly 20 feet behind the head, also matches a sei whale's anatomy. Notably, the initial sketches of the creature depict it in a much less serpentine way, while subsequent sketches were sensationalized substantially. Some suggest that the crew might have been fooled by an optical illusion or a combination of mundane things appearing as one. Rough seas, reflections, or floating debris can sometimes trick observers. Others have suggested that it may have been a group of whales or dolphins that the observers incorrectly viewed as a single entity. However, given the length of the sighting and the number of witnesses, a purely illusionary scenario seems unlikely in this case. The mid-19th century did see a few hoaxes related to sea monsters, and some modern observers have tried to fit this incident into that narrative. However, nothing about the Daedalus case suggests a hoax by its crew. The officers had no clear motive to lie, and in fact they risked and received significant ridicule and professional backlash by coming forward. While newspapers may have exaggerated certain details for effect, the core testimony appears sincere. Personally, I see no reason whatsoever for the crew to lie about this encounter, and the idea that the entire ship could be brought on board for a weird sea serpent hoax seems highly unlikely. Another possibility considered is that the Daedalus encounter was with an unknown or subsequently extinct species. Fans of this theory have hailed this incident as one of the best pieces of evidence for an uncatalogued sea monster. Speculations have included a surviving plesiosaur, an immense marine snake or eel, or even an undiscovered giant squid. To date, however, no tangible evidence has ever emerged to support the existence of such creatures. Others believe it may be a creature that went extinct in the subsequent years, but no evidence exists for this being the case. More than 175 years later, the Daedalus sea serpent encounter remains a fascinating unsolved mystery. In hindsight, the most plausible conclusion is that the crew did see a real animal, but misinterpreted its appearance. However, with no physical proof and only the crew's reports, there's significant room for speculation. What is certain is that this is one of the best documented sea serpent sightings ever, and it made a lasting impact on both popular imagination and scientific debate. In late 1809, as the Napoleonic Wars ravaged Europe, a 25-year-old British diplomat named Benjamin Bathurst set out on a tense journey home. Bathurst was the well-connected son of a bishop, and already a seasoned envoy despite his age. He had just left Vienna, where he'd tried in vain to draw Austria into an alliance against Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, with Austria defeated, Bathurst feared French spies were on his trail. Disguised as a humble merchant and traveling under a false name, he planned to slip north through Prussia to the port of Hamburg and sail back to England. It was a risky route. The roads were crawling with bandits and stray soldiers, and every town posed new dangers for a lone British envoy behind enemy lines. On the evening of November 25, 1809, Bathurst's carriage halted at the Prussian town of Perleberg for a brief rest. He and his courier, a man named Herr Kraus, had dinner at the White Swan Inn, while fresh horses were being readied for the next leg of their trip. Bathurst was cautious. He had decided to depart under cover of darkness, hoping the night would cloak his passage. Ever on edge, he peered into the gloom and was wary of every flicker of shadow around the inn yard. At around 9 p.m., with the carriage waiting in the lamplit courtyard, Bathurst donned his heavy fur coat and stepped outside. Witnesses later recalled seeing him walk around to the front of his horses, perhaps to inspect the team or speak to the carriage driver. In that fleeting moment, the young diplomat vanished. When Krauss emerged moments later, there was no sign of Bathurst anywhere. One moment Bathurst was there beside the horses, the next he had melted into the shadows without a sound. Local authorities were notified, but in the chaos of Napoleonic-era Prussia, a missing traveler raised little alarm at first. However, when the Prussians, who were officially neutral at this point, learned that the man wasn't a merchant, but a British diplomat, this caught the attention of the local authorities. By the next day, Captain Friedrich von Klitzing had soldiers dragging the nearby river and combing Perleberg for any trace of the Englishman. Their search soon turned up disturbing clues. Bathurst's fur-lined cloak was found hidden in a stable behind a house owned by an inn worker. 2 weeks later, a pair of his trousers surfaced in the woods outside town. Oddly, the pants had strange holes in them and contained papers including a letter to Bathurst's wife, but there were no bloodstains. It looked like someone had fired shots through the clothing after removing it, perhaps to fake a violent ambush. Suspicion ended up falling on a member of the inn's staff, August Schmidt. He was caught with the missing coat and promptly arrested, but no body or weapon was found, and he was eventually released without charges. And I just have to mention it here, but this expensive coat was found in an outhouse owned by the Schmidt family. So yeah, sometimes the comedy just writes itself, doesn't it? Desperate for answers, Bathurst's wife, Phillida, traveled to Prussia and even secured an audience with Napoleon Bonaparte to ask if he knew of her husband's fate. Napoleon solemnly denied any French involvement, and indeed no hard evidence ever tied French agents to the disappearance. The Prussian king and British government posted hefty rewards for information, yet every lead turned cold. As the winter of 1809 wore on, Benjamin Bathurst had effectively vanished without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions. In the absence of a definitive answer, numerous theories emerged to explain his disappearance. The simplest and most mundane explanation is that Bathurst was robbed and slain by opportunists. He was traveling with conspicuous wealth, a fine coat, jewelry, money, through an area that had been impoverished by war. It's easy to imagine him stepping away from the inn's lights and being ambushed in the darkness by thieves. The suspicious conduct of the inn's employees and the fact that the wealth seems to have been distributed amongst them supports this idea. The fact that he wasn't openly traveling as a diplomat also lends some additional credibility to the theory. I imagine the inn staff would have seen a wealthy merchant as much easier pickings than an influential and well-connected British diplomat on official business on the continent. But guys, I'm going to dox myself a bit here. I'm not a Prussian waiter at an inn circa the Napoleonic era, so this is just speculation on my part. I know some of you are probably shocked right now, but yeah, I just got to speak my truth. Years later, in 1852, workers demolishing a nearby building discovered a human skeleton buried under a threshold, the skull split by a heavy blow. Many believed that Bathurst had finally been found, though at the time there was no way to prove this was him, and the evidence wasn't preserved. At the time, public opinion favored a more conspiratorial view, that Bathurst was the victim of an attack by French agents. As a British envoy working against Napoleon, he could have been targeted. British newspapers loudly accused Napoleon's spies of abducting Bathurst, suggesting he'd been seized and quietly eliminated on official orders. The French government angrily refuted these charges, instead insinuating that Bathurst had gone insane. The French government further accused the British diplomatic service of routinely employing people who are in poor mental health. They even released an official statement saying that the British diplomatic service is well known worldwide for employing madmen, which I suppose passed for 19th century French banter. Despite extensive diplomatic inquiries, no proof ever emerged that France captured or in any other way interfered with Bathurst. As I mentioned earlier, Napoleon personally guaranteed to Bathurst's wife that Bathurst hadn't been harmed by French agents. Given the context at the time, this didn't satisfy many in Britain. However, these inquiries were raised again after Napoleon's fall, and again officials denied all involvement in the disappearance. Further, historians find it highly unlikely that Napoleon would have ordered a diplomat to be abducted and slain. The reasoning for this is grounded in practicality. All sides in any conflict know that diplomats are necessary, and neither side wishes to have their people treated in such a way. Another theory suggests that Bathurst took the opportunity to leave his life behind and live on the continent. Under intense stress and fearing for his life, it's possible he suffered a mental breakdown or decided to desert his mission. Friends noted that in his final days, he was extremely anxious, even paranoid, about being followed. Indeed, the letter Bathurst left for his wife, recovered from his abandoned trousers, was reportedly disjointed and desperate, as if he felt surrounded by enemies. Perhaps he lost his nerve and fled into hiding. One rumor claimed that an unidentified Englishman fitting Bathurst's description turned up in a Baltic port that winter, refusing to give his name, and boarded a ship for Sweden. According to this unverified narrative, the vessel sank in a storm. Despite the intense stress he was under, most experts agree that there's simply no indication that he chose to willingly run off. Notably, in modern times, the story of Benjamin Bathurst has found new life, with an infusion of paranormal influence. Given that he disappeared under such bizarre circumstances, some have speculated that he may have slipped through time. That said, ultimately, there's no indication that such an event ever occurred. Over 2 centuries later, the disappearance of Benjamin Bathurst remains an enduring mystery. The most likely conclusion, that he was slain by local robbers in Prussia, is also the least sensational, but it fits best with the sparse facts we have. Yet without definitive proof or witnesses, absolute certainty has eluded all investigations. No culprit was ever identified, and no grave was ever officially confirmed. The Sankabetsu brown bear incident of December 1915 stands as the worst animal attack in Japan's recorded history. Notably in Japanese, this event has gone on to be known, in translation, as the Brown Bear Storm, indicating the ferocity of the ursine onslaught which occurred. Over the course of 6 days in a remote Hokkaido settlement, a single male Usuri brown bear terrorized villagers, slaying 7 people and injuring 3 others. Sankabetsu in 1915 was a newly settled pioneer hamlet in Hokkaido's rugged interior. Few people lived there, and the area's forests were habitat to Hokkaido's native brown bears. Encounters with wildlife were common on the frontier, especially as settlers cleared land and bears foraged near farms. In mid-November 1915, local farmer Ikeda Tomizo and his family had their first run-in with a large male brown bear. At dawn one morning, the bear appeared at the Ikeda homestead, startling the family horse. The bear stole some harvested corn, but fled back into the woods when confronted. Recognizing the potential danger to people and livestock, Ikeda and a group of experienced bear hunters kept watch for the bear's return. The bear did return on November 30th, and the hunters shot at it, wounding the animal but failing to bring it down. They tracked blood trails toward the mountains until a snowstorm forced them to turn back. Believing a wounded bear would likely avoid further human contact, The villagers hoped the threat had passed. Unfortunately for the locals, they were mistaken, and this wounded bear was about to strike back in a big way. On the morning of December 9th, 1915, the large brown bear suddenly appeared at the Ota family's house, the first in a series of deadly incursions. Inside were Abe Mayu, a farmer's wife, and an infant named Hasumi Mikio, whom she was babysitting. The bear burst into the house and mauled the baby with furious anger. Mayu fought back desperately. It said she threw firewood at the bear and then tried to flee. The enraged bear easily overtook Mayu, mauling her, and dragged her off into the surrounding forest. When other villagers arrived at the scene, they found a horrific sight. Blood pooled on the floorboards of the house, described by witnesses as resembling a slaughterhouse. News of the attack spread quickly through the settlement. By that evening, armed villagers gathered at the Ota home, fearing the bear would return. Around 8 p.m., the bear indeed crept back to the Ota property under cover of darkness. The men on guard were tense and panicked at the bear's reappearance. One villager managed a panicked shot, but the bear slipped away into the night before the hastily organized militia could bring it down. In the early pre-dawn hours of December 10th, a search party of about 30 men ventured into the woods to find the bear and recover Mayu's body. They found a disturbing scene. The bear had stashed Mayu's remains under the snow near a fir tree, apparently to preserve the meat for later consumption. This discovery confirmed their worst fear. The bear was actively treating humans as prey. The group pressed on and soon encountered the bear, still very close to the village. 5 men opened fire, and 1 bullet struck the bear, causing it to retreat with a wound. That night, the worst came to pass. Many women and children from the area had sought refuge at the home of the Miyuke family, considered safer because it was being guarded by armed men after the prior day's attack. Miyuke Yao was there with her children, as were members of the neighboring Saito family. Most of the guards, however, had rushed off upon news that the bear was seen back at the Ota farm that evening, leaving the Miyuke house virtually unprotected. Sometime late on December 10th, the bear silently approached the Miyuke homestead. Yao, carrying her infant son Umakichi on her back, heard a rumble outside. Before she could react, the bear smashed through a window into the house. The disturbance upset the hearth. The cooking pot overturned and doused the fire, and the only oil lamp was knocked over, plunging the crowded home into darkness. Yao tried to flee with her children, but her young son Yujiro clung to her legs in terror, tripping her as they ran. The bear seized Yao, biting into Umakichi as well. One guard, Odo, had remained near the Miyuke house. He bravely intervened, drawing the bear's attention. The bear dropped Yao and her baby to attack Odo, clawing his back as he tried to hide behind furniture. Yao managed to gather some of her children and escape into the night, despite serious head wounds. Inside the house, the enraged bear then turned to the other occupants. The animal mauled 3-year-old Miyuke Kinzo and 6-year-old Saito Haruyoshi, ending them both. It also bit another child, Saito Iwao, severely injuring him. Next, the bear set upon Take Saito, a woman who was 8 months pregnant. And for the sake of everyone watching, I'm going to leave what happened next to your imagination. Outside, Yao, badly injured but alive, encountered the returning guardsmen and alerted them to the carnage at her home. When the rescuers arrived, they heard the bear still snarling and smashing inside the dark house. Assuming no one could have survived, some proposed burning the house down to incinerate the bear. However, Yao, holding out hope that some of the little ones were alive, thankfully forbade it. Instead, the men devised a plan. They split into 2 teams, one at the front door and one at the back of the house. The rear team created a diversion of noise, shouting and rattling weapons, to flush the bear out the front. As expected, the bear burst out the front door. But in the confusion, one guard's rifle misfired, and others hesitated for fear of hitting their comrades. Amid the chaos, the bear barreled past the line of men and vanished once more into the forest. Entering the house by torchlight, the villagers beheld a scene of utter horror. In 2 nights, 6 people had been ended, and several others gravely wounded. The survivors and other townsfolk, fearing the bear's return yet again, gathered at the local school for shelter. At this point, many of Sankabetsu's residents were convinced they were dealing with a demon bear, not a normal animal, given its relentlessness, brutality, and level of cunning. By December 11th, news of the incident had reached authorities. Local officials sent out a group of experienced hunters and trackers to bring the bear in, including a locally renowned elite bear hunter. One extremely controversial idea was to use a victim's corpse as bait to lure the creature into a trap, since the bear had dragged off bodies before. This proposal was understandably met with outrage by the bereaved families, and was ultimately abandoned after an attempt failed to draw the bear out of hiding. For 2 days, the bear eluded search parties, though it did raid empty houses for winter food stores, as evidenced by ransacked provisions. On the night of December 13th, hunters thought they spotted a moving shadow near an ice bridge checkpoint and opened fire. They later found bear tracks and drops of blood, suggesting the demon bear had been wounded once more, but that he continued to prowl the area. By the morning of December 14th, heavy snow was imminent, threatening to erase the bear's tracks. The hunting team knew this might be their last chance before winter storms. An elite hunter and a local guide set off into the forest to track the bear immediately, choosing to move as a pair for speed and stealth rather than as a larger group. This was dangerous, but having too large a party would potentially alert the bear. Before long, they found the bear peacefully resting near a Japanese oak tree. The hunter got within 60 feet and took careful aim before he started blasting. His first shot hit the bear's heart, and a second shot struck its head, finally bringing the great beast down for good. In the aftermath, the bear's size and condition were noted with astonishment. It weighed about 750 pounds and measured almost 9 feet tall, enormous for an Ussuri brown bear, indicating a healthy adult in its prime. A necropsy of the bear confirmed the gruesome truth. Human remains were found in its stomach. Villagers, enraged and grief-stricken, took a form of revenge by later dismembering and eating the bear's meat, an act meant to quote-unquote settle the score with the man-eater. Ultimately, the villagers had come to believe that the bear was a supernatural force, and the village was largely abandoned in the years that followed. Interestingly, a 6-year-old boy who witnessed the bear attacks, Haruyoshi Okawa, vowed revenge on bears as a whole. Over the course of his life, he went on to claim the lives of 102 Ussuri brown bears. The Sankabetsu incident naturally raised the question, why did this particular bear behave so aggressively and persistently? Several theories and contributing factors have been discussed by historians and wildlife experts. Many believe the bear woke up from hibernation early due to hunger. An underfed bear emerging in early winter would be exceptionally ravenous and prone to bold attacks. Indeed, the initial encounters in November 1915 suggest the animal was scrounging for food, raiding corn stores, when most bears should have been denned for the winter. However, others have pointed out that the bear weighed 750 pounds, indicating that the animal wasn't as underfed as some would like to claim. While hunger may have set the stage, human actions likely exacerbated the bear's aggression. Notably, the bear did not harm any people during its first appearances. It fled after stealing corn, until it was shot and wounded by villagers on November 30th. Another factor is that the bear was an exceptionally large male in the prime of life, which likely contributed to its confidence in taking on humans. Ussuri brown bears are among the largest brown bear subspecies and are nearly comparable to North American grizzlies in size and strength. Another factor was the recent encroachment by humans into the area at the time. In a somewhat bizarre turn of events, today the site is home to the Sankabetsu Brown Bear Incident Reconstruction Site. Tourists can come visit the area and see giant statues and reconstructions of the bear terrorizing the villagers. Imagine a vast island appearing on old maps, only to vanish when explorers went to find it. New South Greenland was one such phantom island, a phantom landmass that captured imaginations in the 19th century. Its story is a fascinating tale of exploration, error, and the enduring allure of the unknown. A phantom island is essentially a geographic mirage, an island once reported and charted, but later proven not to exist. These are, in essence, the ghost stories of cartography. Many arose during the Age of Sail, when explorers with primitive navigation tools miscalculated positions or were fooled by illusions at sea. Fog banks, floating ice, or tricks of light could make open ocean look like distant land. Eager sailors announced new discoveries, and mapmakers dutifully added them to their charts. Some phantom islands persisted for years or even centuries before being quote-unquote undiscovered. The tale of New South Greenland begins in March 1823 in the icy seas off Antarctica. American Captain Benjamin Morrell was commanding the schooner Wasp on a sealing voyage. They were exploring the virtually uncharted Weddell Sea when his crew sighted something that looked like a coastline to the west. Elated, Morrell steered toward this apparent shore and followed it for several days, mapping as he went. By his estimate, the Wasp traced over 300 miles of continuous coastline. The shores were visible with high mountains beyond. The island was teeming with life, including flocks of seabirds and thousands of seals, convincing Morrell that a substantial new land lay before him. Believing he had encountered a new extension of Antarctica, or perhaps a large island, Morrell named the supposed land New South Greenland. He carefully recorded coordinates for its capes and bays, then turned north as winter ice closed in. It's important to note this winter ice element, since the Wasp never directly made landfall on the island due to safety reasons. Back in port, Morrell published his account of this discovery, sparking a stir in geographic circles. If true, he had found a huge unknown land at the bottom of the world. Some maps even began depicting a vague coastline or a blank space labeled New South Greenland in that region. Not everyone accepted Morrell's claim. The captain already had a reputation for either exaggeration or a lack of competence, or both, depending on the source. Simply put, he wasn't the most reliable witness to begin with, but his crew had also witnessed the supposed new land as well, bolstering his claim substantially. In 1838, French explorer Jules Dumont d'Urville sailed to the coordinates of New South Greenland's supposed northern cape to check for himself. He found nothing but empty ocean and drifting ice where the coast should have been. This stark failure bolstered skeptics' belief that Morrell's land was a mistake, perhaps a mirage of distant ice or a navigational error. Morrell might have been off course, or maybe he saw an illusion that looked like solid ground. Yet the phantom refused to fade away, and in 1843, the respected British explorer Sir James Clark Ross reported sighting a hazy appearance of land in the same general area of the Weddell Sea. In the view of many contemporaries, this took the claim from an unreliable sighting by a captain with a shoddy reputation to just short of established geographic fact. Ross couldn't get closer due to heavy pack ice, but his glimpse of a distant misty mountain on the horizon kept the mystery alive a while longer. For the rest of the 19th century, the Weddell Sea remained a blank space, its phantom islands unverified. The final verdict on New South Greenland came with the dawn of the 20th century, when Antarctic expeditions at last probed this remote region. In 1912, Wilhelm Filchner led a German voyage into the Weddell Sea, specifically to hunt for the rumored land. By chance, Filchner's ship, the Deutschland, became trapped in pack ice and drifted near Morell's reported coordinates. Seizing the opportunity, Filchner's team journeyed over the ice in search of any shoreline. They saw none, only unbroken white sea ice in every direction. To be sure, they drilled through the ice and measured the ocean depth below. The water proved to be thousands of feet deep, far too deep for any landmass. Filchner concluded that New South Greenland had never existed, except perhaps as an optical illusion. However, due to the upcoming conflict that was about to engulf the world, this wasn't widely reported at the time. Further confirmation came in 1915 from Sir Ernest Shackleton during his Endurance expedition. Also stuck in the Weddell Sea ice, Shackleton's crew witnessed the same mirage-like phenomenon. They witnessed distant, towering shapes that looked like land, which then eventually faded away. They were seeing a polar mirage known as a fata morgana, which bends light to conjure phantom islands on the horizon. Soundings again found only deep ocean where land was supposed to be. Shackleton concluded that Morell's version of Greenland was nothing more than ice and vapor, effectively ending this mystery that once haunted the Southern Ocean.